My name is Margaret Wilson. For 15 years, I raised my 3 grandchildren as if they were my own after my daughter and her husband died in a tragic accident. I gave them everything: my home, my savings, my heart. But when they grew up and took control of the family home I had worked so hard to maintain, they relegated me to the cold, damp basement with nothing but a cot and a small TV. They said I was a burden, that I took up too much space. They forgot everything I sacrificed. For them. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Little did they know that my will contained a surprise that would change everything. I may be old, but I'm far from foolish. The early eye. Morning sunlight streamed through the small basement window, casting weak shadows across my makeshift bedroom. I winced as I sat up from the cot that had been serving as my bed for the past 8 months. At 72, my joints protested loudly against the thin mattress. The basement was always damp, making my arthritis flare up something terrible. I could hear footsteps overhead, the sound of my eldest grandchild, Stephanie, rushing around the kitchen. She was 30 now, a successful marketing executive who had taken over the master bedroom of the house I had paid off decades ago. The house where I raised her and her siblings after my daughter Caroline and her husband Michael died in that horrific car crash 15 years ago. I still remember that rainy night when the police knocked on my door. I was 67 then, looking forward to a peaceful retirement. Instead, I became the guardian of 3 traumatized children. Stephanie was 15, Bradley 13, and little Emma just 10. My world changed forever, but I never complained. They were all I had left of my Caroline. Slowly, I pulled myself up and reached for my worn terry cloth robe. The concrete floor was cold beneath my slippered feet as I made my way to the tiny bathroom they had installed in the corner of the basement. Really, just a toilet and small sink wedged next to the water heater. The shower was upstairs, which I was only allowed to use when convenient for everyone else. I glanced at the old digital clock on my nightstand, 6:45 a.m. I needed to be upstairs to make breakfast for Bradley before he left for work. He was 28 now and worked at the local bank. He had the second largest bedroom in the house, my old sewing room that I had converted for him years ago. As I climbed the creaky stairs, I heard Emma's voice from the kitchen. "Is Grandma up yet? I need to leave by 7:30. Emma, now 25, and working as a nurse, still lived at home in what used to be the guest bedroom. She was the softest of the 3, but even she had grown increasingly impatient with me over the past few years. "I'm right here, sweetheart," I said as I reached the top of the stairs. Stephanie stood at the kitchen island, scrolling through her phone while sipping from an expensive travel mug. She barely glanced up. "You're on breakfast duty today, remember? Brad has that meeting, and Emma's shift starts early." "Of course I remember," I said, making my way to the refrigerator. I remembered everything. The countless nights I stayed up with them after nightmares about their parents, the school lunches I packed, the tears I dried, the college tuition I paid from my retirement fund. The kitchen I stood in now was completely remodeled from the cozy space where I had taught them all to bake cookies. Last year, Stephanie had decided the house needed modernizing and spent a small fortune on cold marble countertops and stainless steel appliances that looked like they belonged in a restaurant kitchen. The warm yellow walls I had painted were now a stark white. The breakfast nook where we once shared family meals had been replaced with a sleek bar area where they could work on their laptops. "Nothing too heavy," Emma said, walking in already dressed in her scrubs. "Maybe just some avocado toast and that organic juice from the farmer's market." I nodded, pulling out eggs, avocados, and the artisanal bread they insisted on buying from a specialty bakery downtown. When they were children, they had been thrilled with pancakes shaped like Mickey Mouse or simple oatmeal with cinnamon and brown sugar. Bradley appeared next, adjusting his tie. At least he acknowledged me with a nod. "Morning, Grandma," just coffee. For me, I'll grab something at the office. The three of them chatted about their plans as if I weren't there, preparing their breakfasts and lunches just as I had when they were children. The only difference was that back then, they would hug me and thank me. Now I was just the old woman who lived in the basement. It hadn't always been this way. When they first grew up and started their careers, they were appreciative. They brought me flowers on my birthday and took me out for Mother's Day. But 3 years ago, when I fell and broke my hip, something changed. My recovery was slow, and I needed help with daily tasks. That was when the complaints began. "Grandma, you can't keep all these old photographs out. They collect dust." "Grandma, your things are taking up too much space." "Grandma, maybe it would be better if you were closer to the laundry room anyway." And so, bit by bit, my life was moved to the basement. First, it was just my excess belongings, then my books and keepsakes, and finally, me. The room I had shared with my late husband for 40 years was now Stephanie's home office and walk-in closet. The living room furniture I had saved for years to buy was replaced with modern pieces that weren't embarrassing when they had friends over. "Don't forget I have a book club tonight," Stephanie said as she grabbed her purse. "And the Hendersons are coming for dinner tomorrow, so you'll need to make that pot roast they liked last time." "The Hendersons?" I asked, confused. "Your work? Colleagues?" "No, Grandma," Stephanie said with thinly veiled irritation. "The Hendersons from next door. I've told you 3 times already. They're interested in buying the house." My heart stopped. "Buying the house? But this is our home." Bradley shuffled uncomfortably. "It's just a preliminary discussion, Grandma. Nothing's decided." "We've all been talking," Emma added, not meeting my eyes. "With the real estate market so good right now, it makes sense to sell. We could all get our own places. And what about me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The three of them exchanged looks, that familiar glance that meant they had already discussed this without me. "There's a really nice assisted living facility in Maplewood," Stephanie said, her voice suddenly honeyed. "We toured it last week. They have activities, people your own age to talk to. You went looking at homes for me without telling me?" The betrayal stung sharper than any physical pain I had endured. "It's not like that," Bradley said, but his eyes told a different story. "We just think it would be better for everyone. You need proper care." "I don't need a facility," I said firmly. "I need my family, the family I raised when no one else could." "That was 15 years ago, Grandma," Stephanie said, her tone clipped. "And we're grateful, but life moves on. We can't be expected to put our lives on hold because you don't want to downsize." Downsizing. As if my existence in their lives had become nothing more than an inconvenient piece of furniture. "I see," I said, turning back to the stove to hide the tears welling in my eyes. "Will you at least consult me before making any final decisions? This house has been in our family for generations." "Of course," Emma said quickly, though her reassurance rang hollow. After they all left for work, I sat alone at the kitchen counter they rarely allowed me to use, nursing a cup of tea and thinking about how we had ended up here. I had done everything I could for those children. When they came to live with me, I was still grieving the loss of my husband Thomas, who had died just 2 years earlier from a heart attack. Thomas and I had been planning our dream vacation to Italy, the one we had put off for decades while raising our daughter and building our modest contracting business. The tickets had been purchased, the itinerary planned. Instead, I used that savings to buy Bradley braces and pay for Stephanie's soccer team trips. I never regretted it. Not for a moment. They were broken children, and they needed stability and love. I made sure they continued seeing their therapist, kept their school routines consistent, and spent countless hours helping with homework and attending parent-teacher conferences. I wanted them to know they were loved, that despite the terrible loss they had suffered, they still had family who would move mountains for them. And I did move mountains. When Stephanie wanted to attend an expensive private university across the country, I sold the vacation cabin Thomas and I had purchased for our retirement. When Bradley struggled with dyslexia, I paid for specialized tutoring that insurance wouldn't cover. When Emma developed anxiety after a bad relationship in high school, I found her the best therapist in the state. The house we lived in had been my haven with Thomas. We had purchased it as a young couple with nothing but dreams and determination. It was a fixer-upper back then, and we spent weekends painting and repairing, making it our own. The garden in the back was where Caroline took her first steps. The oak tree in the front yard was where Thomas built a tire swing that delighted the neighborhood children for decades. Now they wanted to sell it to the Hendersons, who would probably tear it down and build one of those modern monstrosities that were popping up all over our once charming neighborhood. I pulled myself from these painful thoughts and decided to focus on what I could control. I still had my weekly lunch with my friend Dorothy, who lived 3 blocks away. Dorothy was my age, but her children had set her up in a lovely mother-in-law cottage on their property. She had her independence and dignity, yet was still part of the family. Every time I visited, the contrast to my situation became more glaring. As I was cleaning up the breakfast dishes, my cell phone rang. It was Richard Evans, my attorney and the son of my dear friend Helen, who had passed away 5 years ago. Richard had helped me set up my will and trust after Thomas died. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Margaret, how are you? Richard's warm voice was a balm to my wounded spirit. Oh, getting by, I replied, not wanting to burden him with my troubles. I'm calling because you asked me to remind you about the trust review this month. Do you still want to come in, or would you prefer I visit you at home? I hesitated. My grandchildren didn't know about my monthly meetings with Richard. They assumed what little money I had left was in a simple savings account that would barely cover funeral expenses. The truth was more complicated. Thomas had been a shrewd businessman and a careful investor. While we lived modestly, he had built a considerable nest egg that I had managed to grow over the years. The house was just part of it. There was also the commercial property downtown that generated rental income, the stock portfolio, and the life insurance policy that I had never touched. My grandchildren knew nothing of this. Over the years, I had tested them, mentioning financial struggles to see if they would offer help, discussing the future to gauge their intentions. Each test revealed more of their true characters. I think I'd like to come to your office, Richard, I decided. There are some changes I want to discuss. After arranging a time for the following week, I hung up and stared out the kitchen window at the garden I had lovingly tended for decades. The rose bushes needed pruning, but Stephanie had hired a landscaping service that did nothing but mow the lawn and trim the hedges. My beautiful heirloom roses were suffering from neglect, just like me. I made a decision then, standing in the kitchen that no longer felt like mine. I wouldn't go quietly to some facility while they profited from selling my home. Thomas wouldn't have wanted that, and neither would Caroline. I had one card left to play, and now was the time. That evening, while my grandchildren were out, I carefully climbed the stairs to what had once been my bedroom. Now it was Stephanie's domain, filled with expensive clothes and the trappings of success. I went to the back of the closet where a loose floorboard concealed a small safe that she didn't know about. Inside was a leather journal, Thomas's journal, where he had documented every investment, every property purchase, and every account number. Next to it was a USB drive containing digital copies of all our important documents, updated regularly by Richard's office. These would be my ammunition in the battle ahead. Not to punish my grandchildren, but to teach them one final lesson about gratitude, respect, and the true meaning of family. As I closed the safe and replaced the floorboard, I heard the front door open. Quickly, I slipped out of the bedroom and made my way back toward the basement stairs. "Grandma?" Emma's voice called out. "What are you doing up here?" I turned to find her standing in the hallway, still in her scrubs, looking at me with suspicion. "Just looking for some aspirin," I lied smoothly. "My arthritis is acting up again." Her face softened slightly. "The medicine cabinet is in the bathroom. Do you need help?" "No, dear, I can manage. How was your day? Any interesting patients?" The distraction worked. Emma launched into a story about a child who had come into the emergency room with a Lego piece stuck in his nose. By the time she finished, we were downstairs and the moment of suspicion had passed. Later that night, lying on my uncomfortable cot in the basement, I thought about what I was planning. It wasn't revenge I wanted. It was understanding. My grandchildren had forgotten what it meant to be a family, to make sacrifices for those you love. Perhaps my will would be the wake-up call they needed. With that comforting thought, I drifted off to sleep, dreaming of Thomas and the life we had built together. In my dream, he smiled that knowing smile of his and whispered, "Show them who you really are, Maggie. It's about time." And in the morning, that's exactly what I planned to do. The following Monday, I dressed in my best outfit, a navy blue skirt suit I had kept from my days running the contracting business with Thomas. It was slightly loose on my frame now, but still presentable. I called a taxi service, not wanting to ask my grandchildren for a ride and face their questions. "Where are you off to, Grandma?" Emma asked, catching me in the hallway as I was leaving. She had the day off and was still in her pajamas, scrolling through her phone. "Just meeting an old friend for lunch," I replied casually. It wasn't entirely a lie. Richard's mother, Helen, had been one of my dearest friends. Emma barely looked up. "Don't forget to take your medication. And Bradley said he might bring Vanessa over for dinner tonight." Vanessa was Bradley's girlfriend of 3 months, a loud, opinionated woman who worked at his bank and treated me like I was hard of hearing, speaking slowly and loudly whenever we interacted. "I'll be back in time to prepare something nice," I assured her. The taxi arrived promptly and the driver, a kind man in his 60s, helped me into the back seat. As we drove away from the house, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. Even a brief escape from my basement prison felt liberating. Richard's law office was downtown in a beautifully restored Victorian building. His practice focused on estate, planning, and elder law, and he had a reputation for being both competent and compassionate. When I arrived, his secretary Jennifer greeted me warmly. "Mrs. Wilson, it's so good to see you. Richard is expecting you. Can I get you some tea?" I accepted the offer gratefully. Such simple courtesies had become rare in my life. Richard stood when I entered his office, coming around his desk to give me a gentle hug. He was in his early 50s now, with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes that reminded me of his mother. "Margaret, please sit down. You're looking well." "You're a terrible liar, Richard," I chuckled, "but I appreciate the sentiment." He smiled, but his eyes held concern. "How are things at home? Last time we spoke, you mentioned the grandchildren. We're considering selling the house." "Not just considering it anymore. They've already invited potential buyers for dinner." Richard's face darkened. "Without consulting you? The house is still in your name." "For now," I sighed. "But they've been pressuring me to sign it over for estate planning purposes. They've even picked out a facility for me." "And you've come to a decision about how to handle this," Richard stated rather than asked. He knew me well enough to recognize my determined expression. "I have," I confirmed, sitting up straighter. "I want to make some changes to my will and trust, significant ones." For the next hour, Richard took careful notes as I outlined my plan. Occasionally, he asked clarifying questions or offered legal advice on how to structure certain aspects. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and studied me. "Are you certain this is what you want, Margaret? It's quite dramatic." "I've given this a great deal of thought," I assured him. "This isn't about punishment. It's about lessons that need to be learned. Would Caroline and Michael want their children to behave this way? Would Thomas?" Richard nodded slowly. "I understand. We can have the paperwork ready by next week. In the meantime, I strongly advise against signing anything your grandchildren put in front of you. And perhaps you should consider moving in with your friend Dorothy until this is resolved. I shook my head firmly. No, I need to see this through. If I leave now, they'll take it as abandonment, and that will just reinforce their narrative that I'm difficult and unwilling to compromise. After finalizing the details, Richard walked me out to the taxi he had called. Before I got in, he squeezed my hand encouragingly. Your Thomas would be proud of you, Margaret, standing your ground like this. His words brought tears to my eyes. I hope so. Sometimes I wonder what he would think of how things turned out. He'd think you're the same brave woman he married, Richard said confidently. Call me anytime, day or night, if you need anything. When I returned home, the house was quiet. Emma had left a note saying she was meeting friends and would be home late. I took the opportunity to prepare a special dinner for Bradley and his girlfriend, Thomas's famous pot roast recipe that had been a family favorite for generations. As I worked in the kitchen, chopping vegetables and searing the meat, memories flooded back. Thomas standing beside me, teaching me how to make the perfect gravy. Caroline as a teenager, setting the table while complaining about homework. The grandchildren in their early years with us, fighting over who got to lick the spoon when we made dessert. I was so lost in these thoughts that I didn't hear Bradley and Vanessa come in until they were standing in the kitchen doorway. Something smells amazing, Vanessa said, looking around the kitchen with approving eyes. Bradley said you were a great cook. My husband's recipe, I replied, wiping my hands on a dish towel. It's been in the family for years. Well, it smells divine, Vanessa said, setting her designer purse on the counter and kicking off her high heels. The showing ran late, so we're starving. Showing? I asked, glancing at Bradley. He had the grace to look embarrassed. We were looking at condos downtown, just browsing, really. I see, I said quietly, turning back to the stove to hide my expression. So they were already shopping for their new homes, confident the sale of my house would fund their upgraded lifestyles. During dinner, Vanessa dominated the conversation, talking about her promotion at the bank and the vacation she and Bradley were planning to Cabo San Lucas. I noticed how Bradley deferred to her, nodding along to everything she said, occasionally shooting me nervous glances when she mentioned their future plans. We should get back to the city before it gets too late, Bradley said eventually, checking his watch. Early meeting tomorrow. You're not staying the night? I asked, surprised. Bradley usually stayed at the house several nights a week. Vanessa's place is closer to the office, he explained hastily. Thanks for dinner, Grandma. It was delicious as always. They left quickly, taking containers of leftovers I had packed for them. The kitchen fell silent as I cleaned up alone. When I finished, instead of heading down to my basement room, I wandered through the house, touching familiar objects and walls. In the living room, I found myself standing before the fireplace mantel. Most of my family photos had been removed during Stephanie's modernization, replaced with abstract art pieces and stylish vases. But one small photo remained, tucked behind a decorative clock, a picture of Thomas holding baby Caroline on his shoulders, both of them laughing in the summer sunshine. I carefully took the photo and held it to my chest. I'm trying to do the right thing, Thomas, I whispered. But it's so hard when they've forgotten everything we taught them. The next morning, Stephanie cornered me as I was preparing breakfast. The Hendersons were very impressed with the house, she announced, pouring herself coffee. They've made an offer, well above market value. My hand froze midway through cracking an egg. You didn't mention they were coming by yesterday. It was last minute, she said dismissively. They wanted to see it again before making a decision. Anyway, we need to talk about the next steps. The next steps? I repeated, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Yes. If we accept their offer, they want to close quickly. We need to start making arrangements for your move to Maplewood Meadows. And if I don't want to go to Maplewood Meadows? Stephanie sighed heavily. the exasperated sound of someone dealing with a difficult child. "Grandma, we've been over this. It's the best place for someone in your situation. They have nurses, activities, people your own age. My situation?" I set down the egg I was holding before I crushed it in my grip. "And what situation is that, exactly?" "You know what I mean," Stephanie said, avoiding my eyes. "You need supervision. After that fall last year." "I broke my hip, Stephanie. I didn't lose my mind." My voice was sharper than I intended, but her dismissive attitude cut deep. "This is still my house. My name is on the deed." Her expression hardened. "And we're all still on your will as equal beneficiaries. Dad's lawyer confirmed that years ago, so whether we sell now or later, the result is the same. We're just trying to be practical." So that was it. They had checked into my will already, confirming their inheritance before making plans. Little did they know how much had changed since then. "I'll need some time to think about all this," I said finally. "Don't take too long," Stephanie replied, checking her expensive watch. "The Hendersons want an answer by Friday. They're leaving for Europe next week and want everything settled before then." After she left for work, I called Richard. "They've already got a buyer," I told him without preamble. "They want an answer by Friday." Richard's voice was calm but firm. "You don't have to sign anything, Margaret. The house is yours. They can't force you to sell." "But they're making all the arrangements as if it's a done deal." Stephanie even mentioned checking my will to make sure they're all equal beneficiaries. "Which they won't be for much longer," Richard reminded me. "The new documents will be ready tomorrow. Can you come in to sign them?" "Yes," I said decisively. "I'll find a way." That evening, all 3 grandchildren were home for dinner, a rare occurrence these days. The tension around the table was palpable, as they exchanged meaningful glances throughout the meal. Finally, Bradley cleared his throat. "Grandma, we need to talk about the Hendersons' offer." I set down my fork carefully. "I'm listening." "They're offering $750,000, Emma said, excitement creeping into her voice despite her efforts to appear somber. "That's $100,000 over the asking price." "It's a very generous offer," Stephanie added. "And the money would more than cover your expenses at Maplewood for many years. The rest would be split between us, as per your will." I looked at each of them in turn, these 3 adults who had once been broken children in my care. What had happened to the grateful teenagers who hugged me on graduation day? The young adults who brought me flowers on my birthday? When had they started seeing me as a burden rather than a person who had given everything for them? "I understand you've already spoken to a lawyer about my will," I said, keeping my voice neutral. They at least had the decency to look embarrassed. "It wasn't like that," Bradley protested weakly. "We just wanted to make sure everything was in order." "And was it? In order?" I asked, genuinely curious about what they had discovered. "Yes," Stephanie jumped in. "Equal 3-way split, just as you always said, which is why this makes perfect sense financially. The house sale plus your savings should be more than enough for your care, and we can each use our portion to secure our futures." I nodded slowly, as if considering their words carefully. "And have you considered that I might not want to sell my home? The home where I raised your mother? The home where I raised you?" "Of course we have," Emma said, reaching across the table to pat my hand condescendingly. "But Grandma, this place is too big for you now. The stairs are dangerous. The basement apartment is just temporary until we found somewhere better." "Ah, so putting me in the basement was for my own good?" I couldn't keep the sarcasm from my voice. "Don't be dramatic," Stephanie snapped. "We did what made sense at the time. Now we have a better solution." "I see," I said quietly. "And what about what I want? Has that factored into your calculations at all?" The 3 of them exchanged glances. "Again, we want what's best for you," Bradley said, though his eyes didn't meet mine. "That's why we've scheduled a tour of Maplewood for Saturday," Stephanie added. "Once you see it, You'll understand why it's the perfect solution." "Perfect for whom?" I asked, standing up from the table. My hands were shaking with suppressed emotion. "For me? Or for you three who want to cash in on my home and ship me off to die among strangers?" "Grandma!" Emma exclaimed, looking shocked. "That's not fair." "Fair?" I laughed bitterly. "Was it fair when you moved all my belongings to the basement without asking? Was it fair when you redecorated the home I built with your grandfather without consulting me? Is it fair that you're planning to sell my home out from under me?" "You're being unreasonable," Stephanie said coldly. "We've done everything for you, taken care of you. This is just the next logical step." "Everything for me?" I whispered, tears welling in my eyes. "I gave up my retirement to raise you. I spent my savings to put you through college. I sacrificed everything so you wouldn't end up in foster care after your parents died." A heavy silence fell over the table. "That was 15 years ago," Bradley finally said, his voice gentle but firm. "And we're grateful, Grandma. We really are. But times change. Circumstances change." "Yes, they certainly do," I agreed, suddenly calm. "Tell the Hendersons I'll have an answer for them by Friday." Their faces lit up with relief and triumph. "I have some errands to run tomorrow," I continued. "I'll be out most of the day." "Do you need a ride?" Emma offered, likely feeling guilty after my emotional outburst. "No, thank you. I've already arranged transportation." The next day, I returned to Richard's office and signed the new documents with a steady hand. Richard witnessed my signature and had his notary make everything official. "It's done," he said, handing me copies of everything in a sealed envelope. "Are you sure you don't want me to come with you when you tell them?" "No," I said firmly. "This is something I need to do myself. But thank you, Richard, for everything." "Your grandchildren won't be happy," he warned. "No," I agreed. "But sometimes the hardest lessons are the most necessary ones." That night, I slept better than I had in months, the sealed envelope tucked safely under my thin mattress in the basement. Tomorrow, I would give the Hendersons, and my grandchildren, my answer, and nothing would ever be the same again. Friday. Morning arrived with a sense of inevitability. The Hendersons were scheduled to come by at 7 that evening for dinner and to receive my answer regarding their offer on the house. My grandchildren had been walking on eggshells around me since our confrontation, their attempts at kindness transparent and hollow. "I picked up those scones you like from Davis Bakery," Emma said, placing a small paper bag on the counter beside me as I prepared breakfast. "The cranberry orange ones." "That was thoughtful, thank you," I replied, noting how she hovered nearby, watching for my reaction, testing to see if I was still upset. "Do you need any help with dinner tonight?" she asked. I could come home early from work. "No need," I assured her. "I've got everything under control." And I did. For the first time, in years I felt completely in control of my life and my future. The documents Richard had prepared were safely hidden in the small lockbox I kept beneath a loose floorboard in the basement. One of the few advantages of my relegated living quarters was that my grandchildren rarely ventured down there. I spent the day preparing an elaborate dinner, Thomas's pot roast again, but this time with all the traditional sides that had made our family meals special over the years. Fresh rolls from scratch, roasted root vegetables with rosemary, creamy mashed potatoes with gravy, and for dessert, my famous apple pie. It would be a proper Wilson family dinner, perhaps the last one in this house. By 6:30, everything was ready. I had set the dining room table with my best china and silver, pieces that had been wedding gifts from Thomas's parents over 50 years ago. I had retrieved them from boxes in the basement where they had been stored during Stephanie's modernization project. "Wow, Grandma went all out," I heard Bradley whisper to Stephanie as they came in from work and saw the dining room. "Is that Grandpa's old china?" "She's finally accepting the situation," Stephanie replied, not bothering to lower her voice. She knows this is for the best. I said nothing, continuing to arrange fresh flowers in the centerpiece. Let them think about what they wanted for now. The Hendersons arrived promptly at 7, Roger and Patricia, a couple in their early 40s with tech industry money and ambitious renovation plans for any property they purchased. I had overheard enough of their previous conversations with my grandchildren to know they intended to gut the interior of my home and convert it into an open-concept showpiece. "Mrs. Wilson, everything looks lovely," Patricia gushed, handing me a bottle of expensive wine. "We've been looking forward to this all week." "Thank you for having us back," Roger added, looking around appreciatively. "This place has such fantastic bones. The craftsmanship you just don't see anymore." "My husband was in construction," I explained, leading them to the dining room. "He personally oversaw every renovation and repair in this house for over 40 years. Dinner progressed smoothly, with conversation flowing naturally enough despite the underlying tension. My grandchildren were on their best behavior, sharing amusing anecdotes about their childhood in the house, stories that conveniently omitted any mention of my role in raising them after their parents' death. "So, Margaret," Roger Henderson said as we finished the main course, "I understand you've come to a decision about our offer." All eyes turned to me. My grandchildren tried to appear casual, but I could see the anticipation in their expressions. They had already mentally spent their portions of the proceeds. "Yes, I have," I replied calmly, setting down my napkin. "But before I give you my answer, I wanted to share something with everyone." I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and pulled out a folded document that Richard had prepared for me. "What's that?" Stephanie asked, her voice sharp with sudden suspicion. "This," I said, unfolding the paper, "is the deed to this house. As you can see, it's solely in my name." Roger Henderson nodded. "Yes, your grandchildren explained the situation. They're helping you transition to assisted living, and as the beneficiaries of your estate, they've been authorized to handle the sale." "Actually," I said gently, "that's not quite accurate. My grandchildren have no legal authority over this property whatsoever." A tense silence fell over the table. "Grandma," Bradley began, his tone placating, "we've discussed this. The will has been changed," I interrupted, my voice still calm but firm. "As of yesterday," Emma gasped. "What do you mean changed?" "Mr. and Mrs. Henderson," I turned to the confused couple. "I'm afraid my grandchildren have been negotiating the sale of property they don't own and will not inherit. I have no intention of selling my home at this time." Patricia Henderson's mouth opened and closed wordlessly. Roger looked between me and my stunned grandchildren. "Perhaps we should excuse ourselves," he said finally, beginning to stand. "This seems like a family matter." "Please finish your pie first," I insisted. "You're not responsible for this misunderstanding, and I'd hate for my apple pie to go to waste." Awkwardly, the Hendersons sat back down. My grandchildren remained frozen in their seats, shock evident on their faces. "You can't just change your will," Stephanie finally sputtered. There are legal procedures." "Indeed there are," I agreed. All of which I followed under the guidance of my attorney, Richard Evans. The same attorney who helped your grandfather and me set up our estate plan over 20 years ago. "But why?" Emma asked, tears welling in her eyes. "We were trying to help you." "Were you?" I asked quietly. "By moving me to the basement? By making decisions about my home and my life without consulting me? By treating me as an inconvenience rather than a person?" The Hendersons looked increasingly uncomfortable. "We really should go," Patricia murmured, nudging her husband. "Please finish your dessert first," I said again, my tone leaving no room for argument. "And then yes, I think it would be best if we concluded our business. To be absolutely clear, Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, this house is not for sale. Not now, and not in the foreseeable future. The remainder of the dessert was eaten in painful silence. As soon as they finished, the Hendersons made hasty excuses and left, Roger throwing an apologetic glance at my grandchildren as they departed. When the front door closed behind them, Stephanie rounded on me. "How could you do this?" she demanded, her face flushed with anger. "Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was? How much planning went into this deal?" "Planning that never included me," I pointed out. "Planning about my home, my life, and my future. We were thinking about what's best for you," Bradley insisted. "No," I said firmly. "You were thinking about what was best for yourselves. Tell me honestly, if the situations were reversed, if I had relegated you to the basement and then tried to sell your home out from under you, would you consider that acceptable?" None of them answered. "I raised you better than this," I continued, my voice breaking slightly. "Your mother and father would be heartbroken to see how you've treated me." "That's not fair," Emma whispered, tears streaming down her face now. "We love you, Grandma. Love is demonstrated through actions, not words," I said gently. "And your actions over the past few years have shown very little love or respect." Stephanie, always the most pragmatic of the three, seemed to be quickly calculating the implications of this development. "So you've changed your will," she said carefully. "May I ask what changes you've made?" I studied her face. My eldest grandchild, so much like her mother in appearance but lacking Caroline's compassion and generosity of spirit. "That's not a conversation for tonight," I replied. "But I will tell you this. As of tomorrow morning, I will be reclaiming the master bedroom, my bedroom, and I expect all of you to find alternative living arrangements within 30 days. "You're kicking us out?" Bradley asked incredulously. "After everything we've done for you?" The irony of his statement almost made me laugh. "I'm asking you to leave my home, yes. Just as you were planning to send me to Maplewood Meadows without my consent." "This is ridiculous," Stephanie snapped, standing up so abruptly her chair nearly toppled over. "We'll contest the will. We'll get a lawyer." "You're welcome to try," I said calmly. "Richard has ensured that everything is legally sound. But before you start throwing around threats, there's something else you should know." I pulled out a second document from my pocket, a printout of a bank statement. I placed it on the table, where they could all see it. "What is this?" Emma asked, leaning forward to look. "This is the trust account your grandfather established before he died," I explained. "The one that has been generating income from his investments and properties. For the past 20 years, their eyes widened as they took in the balance. Just over $3 million. That's not possible," Bradley stammered. "You told us there was barely enough money for your retirement." "I never said that," I corrected him. "You assumed it based on the modest way your grandfather and I chose to live. We believed in living below our means and investing the difference. Thomas was an excellent businessman, and I've continued managing his investments since his death." "You've had this kind of money all along?" Stephanie asked, her voice hollow. "While we've been working so hard, sacrificing what?" "Exactly?" I interrupted, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "I put all three of you through college with no student loans. I bought your first cars. I paid for your braces, your sports equipment, your prom outfits, your graduation parties. I gave you everything I could to help you succeed in life." A heavy silence fell over the dining room. "The money in this account could have easily paid for in-home care for me if that was truly your concern," I continued more gently. "But you never asked about my finances. You just assumed I was a burden to be managed." Emma was sobbing quietly now. Even Bradley looked shaken. Only Stephanie maintained her composure, though her hands trembled slightly. "So, what happens now?" she asked. "Now," I said, rising from my seat, "I reclaim my life and my home. and you, 3, have some serious soul-searching to do. I began collecting the dessert plates, signaling that the conversation was over for now. One by one, my grandchildren left the dining room. I heard Stephanie's bedroom door slam, followed by the sound of drawers being yanked open. Bradley and Emma spoke in hushed tones in the hallway before retreating to their rooms as well. I finished cleaning up alone, taking comfort in the familiar routine. As I washed the last of my mother-in-law's china plates, I felt a curious lightness. For the first time in years, I had stood up for myself. Thomas would indeed be proud. The next morning, I awoke early in my basement room for what I knew would be the last time. I packed my few belongings efficiently. There wasn't much to gather, after being relegated to such a small space. As I climbed the stairs to the main floor, I heard voices in the kitchen. All 3 of my grandchildren were there, looking tired and subdued. Emma's eyes were red-rimmed from crying. Bradley was unshaven, and Stephanie had dark circles under her eyes. "Good morning," I said, setting my small suitcase by the stairs. "Grandma," Emma began hesitantly, "we've been talking all night and we owe you an apology." I waited, saying nothing. "We've been terrible," Bradley admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "Completely, unforgivably terrible to you. I don't even know how it happened. It was just little things at first, and then, suddenly you were planning to ship me off to a home and sell the house out from under me." I finished for him when he trailed off. He nodded miserably. Stephanie, always the most stubborn, remained quiet. "I'm moving back into the master bedroom today," I said firmly, "and as I said last night, I expect you all to find other living arrangements within 30 days. "We understand," Emma said quickly. "And we will. But before that, is there any way we can try to make this right? Any way to earn your forgiveness?" I studied them carefully. Forgiveness isn't something you earn, Emma. It's something that's given. And I do forgive you. You're my grandchildren, and I love you. But forgiveness doesn't mean there aren't consequences for your actions. "The will," Stephanie finally spoke, her voice uncharacteristically small. "What does it say now?" I sighed. "The house and half of the trust will go to a foundation I've established in your parents' names, one that will provide support for children who have lost their parents. The other half of the trust will be divided equally among you 3, but only after each of you has completed 5 years of community service with the foundation." Their eyes widened in surprise. "5 years?" Bradley repeated. "Yes," I confirmed. "Working directly with orphaned children. Giving back in the way that your parents would have wanted you to. In the way that I tried to teach you to." "And if we don't?" Stephanie asked, always thinking ahead. "Then your portion returns to the foundation," I said simply. "This isn't a punishment, Stephanie. It's an opportunity to reconnect with the values your parents and I tried to instill in you." "We'll do it," Emma said immediately, looking at her siblings. "Won't we?" Bradley nodded without hesitation. Stephanie took longer, her practical mind clearly weighing the options, before she finally gave a stiff nod. "Good," I said, picking up my suitcase again. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to reclaim my bedroom. Stephanie, you can move your things to the guest room for the time being." As I passed them on my way to the stairs, Emma reached out and caught my hand. "Grandma, I really am sorry. I forgot who I was supposed to be, who you and Mom and Dad raised me to be." I squeezed her hand gently. "We all lose our way sometimes, Emma. The important thing is finding our way back." Over the next month, my grandchildren gradually moved out of the house. Emma found an apartment near the hospital. Bradley moved in temporarily with a college friend. Stephanie, after some resistance, rented a small condo downtown. The house felt empty at first, but also peaceful. I hired a decorator to restore the warm, homey feel that had been stripped away during Stephanie's modernization. I rehung family photos, brought my favorite furniture up from the basement, and planted new roses in the garden. 1 month after they moved out, I invited all 3 grandchildren to Sunday dinner. It was awkward at first, but as we shared a meal around the table where they had grown up, something began to heal. "I've been thinking," I said as we finished dessert. "The house is too big for just me. I'd like you all to feel welcome to visit, anytime, and perhaps even stay over occasionally. This is still your family home, even if it's not your permanent residence anymore." They exchanged surprised glances. "Really?" Bradley asked. "After everything?" "Family isn't perfect," I told them, looking at each in turn. "We hurt each other sometimes. We make mistakes. But at the end of the day, we're still family." "Thank you, Grandma," Emma said softly. "Don't thank me yet," I replied with a small smile. "Your work with the foundation begins next week, and I'll be checking in regularly to see how you're doing." Stephanie, who had been mostly quiet throughout dinner, finally spoke up. "I've been researching the foundation. The work they do, it's important." "Yes," I agreed. "Just as the work I did raising you 3 was important." "I wish we had understood that sooner," Bradley said regretfully. "Better late than never," I told him, reaching out to pat his hand. "Your parents would be proud to see you making amends, and so am I." As they helped me clear the table and clean the kitchen, without being asked for once, I felt Thomas's presence beside me just as I had so many times over the years. This wasn't the retirement we had planned together, but it was a new beginning, a chance to heal old wounds and rebuild my relationship with my grandchildren on a foundation of mutual respect. And that, I thought as I watched them working together, in the kitchen we had once shared as a family, was worth more than any inheritance. 6 months passed since that pivotal Sunday dinner. The seasons changed, summer faded into autumn, and a new rhythm established itself in our lives. My grandchildren had all begun their required service with the Caroline and Michael Wilson Foundation for Orphaned Children, though each approached their obligation differently. Emma took to the work naturally, with her nursing background and gentle nature. She connected easily with the children at the group home where she volunteered 3 days a week. She would often call me after her shifts, her voice animated as she told me about a breakthrough with a particularly withdrawn child, or a small victory in helping a teenager prepare for a job interview. "There's this girl, Marissa," she told me one evening as we shared tea in my newly restored living room. "She reminds me so much of me after Mom and Dad died, so angry at the world, so scared of getting close to anyone. And how are you helping her?" I asked, noting the passionate gleam in Emma's eyes that I hadn't seen in years. "Just by being consistent, showing up, listening without judgment." She paused, looking down at her teacup. "All the things you did for us that we took for granted." I reached over and squeezed her hand, my heart warming at this glimpse of the compassionate young woman I had raised. Bradley found his footing more slowly. Initially, he approached his service requirement as a transaction. Hours to be logged, a debt to be paid. He was assigned to the Foundation's financial literacy program, teaching basic money management skills to teenagers preparing to age out of the foster care system. "These kids know nothing about bank accounts or credit scores," he complained during his first month. "They're completely unprepared for the real world." "And whose fault is that?" I asked mildly, watching realization dawn on his face. "I guess nobody taught them," he admitted. "Just like nobody taught us after Mom and Dad died. Except you did. You taught us everything." After that conversation, something shifted in Bradley's approach. He developed a comprehensive curriculum for the teens, incorporating real-world scenarios and practical skills. He enlisted colleagues from the bank to serve as mentors, and even convinced his employer to offer internships to promising students. Stephanie, as I expected, had the most difficult adjustment. Always the most strong-willed of my grandchildren, she initially viewed the foundation work as a punishment rather than an opportunity for growth. She was assigned to the administrative side, helping organize fundraising events and manage donor relations. Tasks well suited to her organizational skills and business acumen. I could be advancing my career instead of stuffing envelopes, she grumbled during one of her infrequent visits. 5 years is an eternity in the corporate world. It's a blink of an eye in the span of a life, I countered. Your mother was only 35 when she died. She would have given anything for 5 more years with you children. That silenced her complaints temporarily, but I knew Stephanie well enough to recognize she was going through the motions, fulfilling the letter of the requirement, but not embracing its spirit. That changed 3 months in, when the foundation took on a new case. A pair of siblings, 12-year-old Jason and 9-year-old Lily, whose parents had died in a house fire. The children had no close relatives willing to take them in and were at risk of being separated in the foster system. Stephanie was tasked with finding a placement that would keep them together. She approached it like any other project at first, methodically working through options and making calls. But when she met the children, something unexpected happened. Jason plays chess, she told me during an impromptu visit one rainy Tuesday evening. She had arrived unannounced, soaking wet and oddly energetic. Did you know I used to play with Dad every Sunday? I remember, I said, smiling at the memory of Michael teaching little Stephanie to play on the antique chess set that now sat on my coffee table. You were quite good. I've been teaching him some strategies, she continued, pacing my living room. And Lily, she's so bright, Grandma. She writes these amazing little stories. They deserve to stay together. They need to stay together. I watched her with growing surprise as she outlined an ambitious plan to renovate part of the foundation's community center into temporary housing for sibling groups awaiting permanent placement. I've already spoken to some potential donors, she said, her corporate expertise shining through. And I've sketched out a budget. The ROI in terms of successful placements and emotional well-being would be substantial. ROI? I echoed, amused by her business terminology. She had the grace to look sheepish. Return on investment. Sorry, force of habit. But the point is, these kids need this. And I think I need to do this for them. It was the first time I had seen genuine passion in Stephanie's eyes when discussing the foundation work. For the first time, she was seeing beyond her own inconvenience to the real difference she could make. As autumn deepened, my relationship with each grandchild evolved in its own way. Emma began visiting regularly for Sunday dinners, often staying overnight in what was now truly a guest room. She helped me replant the garden with fall flowers and listened attentively as I shared stories about their mother's childhood. I never knew Mom was afraid of thunderstorms, she said one evening as we sorted through old photograph albums. I am too. She used to crawl into our bed during every storm until she was 12, I confirmed, pointing to a faded photograph of young Caroline clutching a stuffed rabbit. Your grandfather would tell her elaborate stories to distract her until she fell asleep. Like you did for me, Emma said softly. I'd forgotten that. Bradley's visits were less frequent but more purposeful. He helped me update my investment portfolio and set up automatic payments for my bills. He replaced the old water heater before it could fail and installed handrails in the bathroom without being asked. Practical demonstrations of care that meant more than empty words. I've been seeing someone new, he told me over coffee one morning after fixing a leaky faucet. Her name is Meredith. She's a social worker with the foundation. That sounds promising, I said, noting the nervous way he fidgeted with his mug. She's different from Vanessa, he continued. More real, I guess. She called me out last week when I complained about a donor meeting running late. Said there were kids waiting their whole lives for families, so maybe I could spare a few extra minutes, I smiled. She sounds sensible. She'd like to meet you, he said, looking up hopefully. If that's okay. I'd like that very much, I told him, heartened by this small but significant gesture of including me in his life again. Stephanie remained the most distant, her work with the foundation consuming most of her time as she threw herself into the sibling housing project. But even she was softening around the edges. She began calling weekly with updates, asking my opinion on fundraising strategies, gradually rebuilding the bridge between us. The true turning point came at Thanksgiving. For the first time since the confrontation, all 3 grandchildren would be gathering at the house for a holiday meal. I spent days preparing, making each of their favorite dishes alongside the traditional turkey and stuffing. Emma arrived first, bringing homemade cranberry sauce and a shy young doctor from the hospital, where she worked. Bradley and Meredith came next, bearing flowers and a bottle of the wine Thomas and I had always shared on special occasions. Stephanie was the last to arrive, and to my surprise, she wasn't alone. With her were Jason and Lily, the siblings from the foundation. They didn't have anywhere to go for Thanksgiving, she explained as she helped the children out of their coats. The group home was understaffed, and I thought they might enjoy a real family holiday. My heart swelled at the sight of my strong-willed granddaughter gently guiding these wounded children into our home. "They're very welcome here," I assured her, bending down to greet the shy pair. "We have plenty of food, and I've been told my pumpkin pie is quite good." "It's the best," Stephanie confirmed, surprising me further by leaning in to kiss my cheek. I've been telling them all about it. Dinner was lively, with conversation flowing naturally among the adults while Jason and Lily gradually relaxed enough to share stories about school and their interests. I watched my grandchildren interact with them, Emma drawing out quiet Lily, Bradley teaching Jason a card trick, Stephanie ensuring their plates were full and their needs attended to. As I looked around the table, I was struck by how much had changed in just 6 months. The entitled, self-absorbed adults who had relegated me to the basement were transforming before my eyes, rediscovering the compassionate cores I had nurtured in them as children. After dessert, as Meredith and Emma's friend David helped clear the table, Stephanie pulled me aside into the quiet of the study. "Grandma, I need to talk to you about Jason and Lily," she said, her expression unusually vulnerable. "We've been trying to find a permanent placement for them for months, but nothing has worked out. They're getting discouraged, and honestly, so am I." "These things take time," I said gently. "The right family will come along." "That's just it," she replied, taking a deep breath. "I think I might be in the right family." I stared at her, certain I had misheard. "Stephanie?" "I know it sounds crazy," she rushed on. "I'm single. I work long hours. I've never thought of myself as a mother. But these past few months working with them, something's changed. I can't bear the thought of them being separated or bounced around the system until they age out." "You're talking about adoption," I said, wanting to be absolutely clear. She nodded, vulnerability and determination warring in her expression. "I've been thinking about it for weeks. My condo has 2 spare bedrooms. My company has excellent benefits for adoptive parents, including flexible work arrangements. I have the financial resources to provide for them. Parenting is more than logistics, Stephanie," I cautioned, though my heart was racing with hope. "I know that," she said quietly. "That's why I wanted to talk to you first. You did it. You took in 3 traumatized children and raised them on your own. I need to know. Do you think I could do this? Be what they need?" The question hung between us, weighted with history and possibility. I studied my eldest grandchild, so like her mother in her determination, so like Thomas in her practical mind. I thought of how she had changed these past months, how she had opened her heart to these children already. "I think," I said slowly, "that you would be an exceptional mother, Stephanie. Not perfect, none of us are, but exactly what those children need." "Really?" The vulnerability in her voice took me back to when she was 15, asking if I thought She could still try out for the soccer team after her parents' death. Really, I assured her. And you wouldn't be alone. You'd have me, Emma, and Bradley. We're still a family after all. She blinked rapidly, fighting back tears. I've already spoken to a family law attorney. The process could take months, even with my foundation connections. But I want to start. I want to try. Then we'll support you every step of the way, I promised, opening my arms. For the first time in years, my eldest grandchild stepped into my embrace without hesitation, holding on tight as if drawing strength from the connection. When we rejoined the others in the living room, I watched as Stephanie sat between Jason and Lily on the sofa, helping them put together a puzzle Bradley had found in the hall closet. The scene stirred memories of another Thanksgiving long ago, when 3 newly orphaned children had sat in this same room, shell-shocked and grieving, as I tried to create some semblance of normalcy around them. They're going to be okay, Emma said softly, appearing at my side with a cup of tea for me. All of us are. Yes, I agreed, accepting the tea gratefully. I believe we are. Over the next few months, a new pattern emerged. Sunday dinners became a regular tradition again, with various combinations of grandchildren and their significant others attending each week. Stephanie brought Jason and Lily whenever possible, gradually introducing them to the idea that she might become more than just their foundation advocate. The house that had once felt so empty began to fill with life again. Emma helped me convert the basement, my former prison, into a cheerful recreation room for when the children visited. Bradley and Meredith grew more serious, often spending weekends helping with projects around the house. In early spring, as the roses I had planted began to bloom, I received unexpected news. Richard called to tell me that the commercial property downtown, one of Thomas's first investments, had received a substantial offer from a developer. It's nearly twice the appraised value, Richard explained. They want to build a mixed-use complex with affordable housing units. Given your interest in community support, I thought you might want to consider it. I did consider it, and after consulting with my grandchildren, a courtesy they had never extended to me during their house-selling scheme, I decided to accept the offer. The proceeds would significantly expand the foundation's endowment, ensuring its work could continue long after my grandchildren's required service ended. The day we signed the papers, all 3 grandchildren accompanied me to Richard's office. As we celebrated afterward with lunch at Thomas's favorite restaurant, Stephanie raised her glass in a toast. To Grandma, she said, her voice carrying across the table, who taught us the true meaning of legacy. Emma and Bradley echoed the toast, their faces sincere. As I looked at them, truly looked at the adults they had become, I felt a deep sense of peace settle over me. They weren't perfect, and our relationship would always bear the scars of their betrayal and my response. But they were finding their way back to the values Thomas and I had tried to instill, the values their parents had embodied. That evening, as I sat in my garden watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, I felt Thomas's presence beside me more strongly than ever. "We did good work," I whispered to him. "It just took a little longer than expected." The breeze rustled through the rose bushes, carrying the sweet scent of new blooms. In the distance, I could hear my grandchildren's voices as they helped clean up after dinner, their laughter mingling with the chirping of evening birds. This wasn't the retirement Thomas and I had planned so many years ago. It wasn't the future Caroline and Michael had envisioned for their children. But it was ours nonetheless, imperfect, hard-won, and ultimately filled with love. And in the end, that was the greatest inheritance of all. 1 year after that, fateful. Friday night, when I had confronted my grandchildren about selling my home, life had found a new equilibrium. The Caroline and Michael Wilson Foundation was flourishing, with expanded programs and a growing reputation in the community. My grandchildren continued their required service, But what had begun as an obligation was evolving into a genuine purpose for each of them. On a crisp autumn morning, I sat at my kitchen table reviewing the Foundation's quarterly reports. The financial statements showed healthy growth, thanks in part to the commercial property sale and some strategic investments Bradley had suggested. The impact reports were even more gratifying: stories of children finding permanent homes, teenagers receiving college scholarships, and families getting the support they needed during times of crisis. A knock at the back door interrupted my reading. I looked up to see Stephanie through the window, balancing a bakery box in one hand while holding Lily's hand with the other. Jason trailed behind them, carrying a folder tucked under his arm. "We come bearing cinnamon rolls," Stephanie announced as I opened the door. "Fresh from Davis Bakery." "What a lovely surprise," I said, welcoming them in. "I thought you three had plans to visit the Science Museum today." "We do," Stephanie confirmed, setting the pastry box on the counter. "But Jason wanted to show you something first." The 12-year-old stepped forward, suddenly shy. "It's my history project," he mumbled, holding out the folder. "About family legacies." I took the folder and opened it carefully. Inside was a meticulously researched family tree. Not of his biological family, but of the Wilsons. Starting with Thomas and me at the top, it branched down to Caroline and Michael, then to Stephanie, Bradley, and Emma. At the bottom, connected to Stephanie with a dotted line labeled "In Progress," were Jason and Lily's names. "It's beautiful," I said, genuinely moved. "You've put so much work into this." "Stephanie helped me research the dates," Jason explained, growing more animated. "And Lily drew the little portraits beside each name." I examined the small illustrations, simple but heartfelt renderings of each family member. Beside Thomas's name was a hammer, representing his construction business. Caroline had musical notes, reflecting her love of the piano. Michael was depicted with a book, honoring his passion for literature. Beside my name, Lily had drawn a heart with tiny figures inside it, a visual representation of family held close. "My teacher said, 'Family isn't just who you're born to,'" Jason continued, watching my face carefully. "It's who takes care of you and who you belong with." "Your teacher is very wise," I agreed, fighting back tears. "Family is absolutely about belonging and care." "So you like it?" he asked anxiously. "I love it," I assured him. "Would you mind if I had this framed? I think it would look perfect right there." I pointed to a prominent spot on the living room wall where family photos were displayed. Jason beamed with pride, while Lily bounced excitedly. "Can we help pick the frame?" she asked. "Absolutely," I promised. "No one has better taste than you." As the children explored the kitchen, helping themselves to milk and examining the cookie jar, Stephanie drew me aside. "The adoption paperwork is moving forward," she said quietly, her eyes following the children with a mixture of affection and nervousness. "The home study is complete, and my petition has been filed with the court. Richard thinks we could have a hearing date by Christmas." "That's wonderful news," I said, squeezing her hand. "How are you feeling about it all?" "Terrified," she admitted with a small laugh. "Excited. Overwhelmed. I wake up in the middle of the night wondering if I'm making a huge mistake, and then I can't imagine any other path forward." "That sounds exactly like parenthood," I told her with a smile. "I felt the same way when your mother was born, and again when you three came to live with me." "How did you handle it?" she asked, vulnerability shining in her eyes. "One day at a time," I said, simply. "With a lot of love, more patience than I thought I possessed, and the humility to admit when I made mistakes." "I've been making lists," she confessed. "School schedules, doctor appointments, extracurricular activities they might enjoy. The logistics I can handle. It's the emotional stuff that scares me." "The emotional stuff is what matters most," I reminded her gently. "And that's where you've grown the most this past year." She nodded, watching as Jason meticulously arranged cinnamon rolls on plates while Lily carefully poured milk without spilling a drop. They deserve so much more than the system can give them. They deserve a family, I agreed. And you're giving them that. After they left for the science museum, I sat with the family tree Jason had created, tracing the lines that connected our generations. Stephanie's journey toward adoption had been the most unexpected development of the past year, but it wasn't the only significant change. Bradley and Meredith had gotten engaged 3 months earlier, with a simple proposal at Thomas's favorite fishing spot by the lake. They were planning a small wedding in the spring, with a request that in lieu of gifts, guests donate to the foundation's scholarship fund. I realized something. Working with these kids at the foundation, Bradley had told me when he shared the news of his engagement. Money means nothing if you don't have people to share it with. All those years chasing promotions and bonuses, I was missing the point entirely. Emma had experienced her own transformation. Her volunteer work with traumatized children had awakened a new professional interest, and she had enrolled in a master's program in child psychology while continuing her nursing career. Her relationship with the young doctor David had deepened as well, the two of them often volunteering together at foundation events. I understand now why you did what you did, Emma had said during one of our garden sessions, as we planted tulip bulbs for the spring. Changing your will, making us work at the foundation, it wasn't punishment. It was a gift. The most valuable gifts aren't always the ones we want, I replied, but they're often the ones we need. That afternoon, Richard called with news about Stephanie's adoption petition. The court has assigned a date for the hearing, December 18th, just in time for Christmas as we hoped. Stephanie will be thrilled, I said, making a note on my calendar. She's been working so hard to prepare. The judge assigned to the case is familiar with the foundation's work, Richard added. That should help, and the children's caseworker is fully supportive of the placement. What about the home assessment? I asked, knowing this was often a significant hurdle. Completed last week with flying colors, Richard assured me. Stephanie has done everything by the book. She's even arranged flexible working hours and enrolled in parenting classes. After hanging up, I called Stephanie immediately to share the good news. Her usually composed voice broke with emotion when I told her the court date. December 18th, she repeated. Is that really enough time to get everything ready? The nursery was ready the day we brought your mother home from the hospital, I told her. But I still rearranged it 3 times in a panic. You're doing fine. Stephanie, will you come with me? She asked. To the hearing? Try to keep me away, I replied warmly. We'll all be there, the whole family. The next few weeks passed in a flurry of activity. Stephanie threw herself into final preparations, transforming her sleek, minimalist condo into a child-friendly home with dedicated spaces for Jason's science experiments and Lily's art projects. Bradley and Meredith helped assemble furniture, while Emma stocked the kitchen and organized clothes for both children. I watched my grandchildren work together with a sense of wonder and gratitude. The entitled adults who had relegated me to the basement seemed to belong to another lifetime. In their place were these compassionate, thoughtful people who had reconnected with the values Thomas and I had tried to instill in them. The day of the adoption hearing arrived cold but sunny, with a dusting of early snow that made the world look fresh and new. We gathered at the courthouse, Stephanie in a conservative navy dress, the children in their best clothes, and the rest of us dressed formally to show respect for the occasion. What if the judge says no? Lily whispered to me as we waited in the hallway outside the courtroom. Her small hand clutched mine anxiously. The judge is very smart, I assured her. And smart people can see how much Stephanie loves you and Jason. How much we all do. But what if he still says no? She persisted, her 9-year-old mind fixated on the worst-case scenario. I bent down to her level, looking directly into her worried eyes. Then we keep trying, I said firmly. Family doesn't give up, Lily. No matter what happens today, You and Jason are part of our family now." Her shoulders relaxed slightly at this reassurance, and she nodded solemnly. The hearing itself was both more formal and more emotional than I had expected. The judge, a dignified woman in her 60s, reviewed all the documentation thoroughly before addressing Stephanie directly. "Ms. Wilson, you came to this decision through your work with the foundation named after your parents, is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Stephanie replied, her voice steady despite her obvious nerves. "I met Jason and Lily through my service requirement at the Caroline and Michael Wilson Foundation. The service requirement stipulated in your grandmother's will," the judge noted, glancing at me in the gallery with an inscrutable expression. "That's correct," Stephanie acknowledged. "And now you wish to adopt these children as a single parent, while maintaining your executive position at your company?" "Yes, Your Honor. My employer has approved a flexible working arrangement, and I've already established childcare and support systems." The judge turned her attention to Jason and Lily, speaking to them with gentle respect. "And how do you two feel about this arrangement? Do you want Ms. Wilson to be your legal parent?" Jason, always the protective older brother, spoke first. "She's already more than that to us," he said with surprising eloquence for a 12-year-old. "She's the person who shows up no matter what, the person who believes in us." Lily nodded vigorously. "She makes us feel safe," she added simply. "And she lets me keep my nightlight on without making fun." A ripple of gentle laughter moved through the courtroom, and I saw the judge's expression soften. After a few more questions, for the caseworker and reviewing final documentation, the judge made her decision. "Having reviewed all relevant materials and heard testimony from all parties, I find this adoption to be in the best interest of both children. The petition is hereby granted." She smiled at Stephanie, who stood frozen in disbelief. "Congratulations. Ms. Wilson, would you like to take a family photo to commemorate the occasion?" The court clerk came forward with a camera as we all gathered around Stephanie, Jason, and Lily. Emma and Bradley stood proudly beside their sister, while I positioned myself behind the children, my hands resting lightly on their shoulders. In that moment, captured forever in the photograph that would later hang prominently in my living room, the circle of our family expanded to embrace these two children who had experienced such profound loss. Outside the courthouse, we celebrated, with hugs and happy tears. Stephanie, usually so composed, was openly weeping as she held her newly official children close. "You did it," I told her, my own eyes damp with emotion. "I'm so proud of you." "I couldn't have done it without you," she replied, reaching for my hand. "Any of this." "Sometimes we need a wake-up call," I acknowledged. "Even if it comes in the form of a changed will and a basement bedroom." She laughed through her tears. "I deserved worse." "No," I said firmly. "You deserved the chance to become the person you were meant to be. The person your parents would have been proud of." We celebrated that evening with a family dinner at my house, a tradition that had been firmly re-established over the past year. The dining room table was extended to its full length to accommodate everyone. Stephanie with Jason and Lily, Bradley and Meredith, Emma and David, and me at the head, where Thomas had once presided over family gatherings. As we shared the meal, conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and the comfortable interruptions of people who knew each other. Well, I watched as Jason discussed chess strategies with Bradley, while Lily showed Emma her latest drawings. Stephanie, seated beside me, seemed to be absorbing every moment, her face relaxed in a way I hadn't seen since she was a child. "I never thought we'd be here again," she said quietly, as the others were distracted by dessert preparations. "After everything that happened." "Life rarely moves in a straight line," I replied. "It circles back, gives us second chances when we least expect them." "Thank you," she said simply, "for not giving up on us, for being tough enough to do what was necessary." "That's what family does," I told her, echoing the words I had shared with Lily earlier. we don't give up on each other, even when the path gets difficult. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet again, I sat in Thomas's old armchair by the fireplace, reflecting on the day's events and the journey of the past year. The basement that had once been my reluctant bedroom was now a joyful play space for Jason and Lily when they visited. The dining room table that had witnessed such bitter confrontations had become, once again, the heart of family gatherings. The changes in my grandchildren were profound, but the truth was I had changed too. The hurt and resentment I had carried after being relegated to the basement had faded, replaced by a deep appreciation for the unexpected gifts that had emerged from that difficult time. Without that crisis, without taking the stand I did, none of us would have grown in the ways we needed to. As I prepared for bed that night, I paused by the family photographs on my dresser. Among them now was a new addition, the courthouse photo from earlier that day, our expanded family smiling with genuine joy. Beside it stood an older photograph, one taken 15 years earlier when my grandchildren first came to live with me after their parents' deaths. In both images, despite the years between them, there was the same essential truth. Family was not defined by perfect circumstances or easy paths. It was built through challenge and commitment, forgiveness and growth. It was messy and complicated and utterly worthwhile. Thomas and Caroline would have been proud of where we had ended up, even if the journey had taken unexpected detours. That thought comforted me as I drifted off to sleep, grateful for second chances and the winding path that had brought us all home again. 2 weeks later, on Christmas morning, my house was once again filled with the sounds of family. Jason and Lily tore into presents with the uninhibited joy of children who were finally secure in their place in the world. Stephanie watched them with the bemused expression of a new parent, catching my eye occasionally with looks that ranged from panic to profound contentment. Bradley and Meredith arrived bearing additional gifts and wedding planning folders they wanted to review with the family. Emma and David brought breakfast casseroles and news of Emma's acceptance into an advanced certification program in trauma-informed care. As we gathered around the tree, sharing gifts and stories, I found myself overwhelmed with gratitude. The inheritance I had threatened to withhold had ultimately led to something far more valuable than money. It had helped my grandchildren rediscover their capacity for compassion, responsibility, and love. "Grandma, this one's for you," Jason announced, handing me a clumsily wrapped package. Lily and I made it. Inside was a handmade photo album, each page carefully decorated with drawings and captions. The first photos were old ones I recognized: Thomas and me on our wedding day, Caroline as a baby, my grandchildren when they first came to live with me. But the album continued through the present, documenting our reconciliation and healing over the past year. The final page held a drawing rather than a photograph, a house with all of us standing outside it, sunshine beaming down. Above it, in Lily's careful printing, were the words, "Family is where we all belong." I looked up at the circle of faces around me, my grandchildren and the new members they had brought into our family circle. Each of them had been transformed by the journey we had taken together, becoming more thoughtful, more compassionate versions of themselves. "I couldn't have said it better myself," I told Lily, holding the album close to my heart. "Family is indeed where we all belong." And in that moment, I knew that the true inheritance I would leave behind had nothing to do with property or bank accounts. It was this, the values and connections that would outlast me, carrying forward through generations yet to come. Thomas would have approved. 5 years passed, marking the completion of my grandchildren's required service with the foundation. What had begun as an obligation had blossomed into genuine passion for each of them, transforming not just their relationship with me, but their entire approach to life. On a warm spring afternoon, we gathered at the Foundation's newly expanded community center for a ribbon-cutting ceremony. The building, once a neglected warehouse, had been renovated into a vibrant hub offering temporary housing for siblings awaiting placement, educational resources for foster children, and support services for families in crisis. "I can't believe how far we've come," Emma remarked, standing beside me as we watched a group of teenagers rehearsing a performance in the center's new auditorium. She had completed her master's degree in child psychology and now served as the Foundation's Director of Therapeutic Services while maintaining her nursing career part-time. "I can," I replied, squeezing her hand. "You all just needed to remember who you really were." The ceremony was scheduled to begin in 30 minutes, and guests were already arriving. Donors, community partners, and families who had been helped by the Foundation's programs. Bradley, now the Foundation's financial director, was greeting attendees with Meredith. Their 2-year-old son, Thomas, named after his great-grandfather, tottered alongside them, charming everyone he met. Stephanie approached us, looking polished in a tailored suit despite the casual setting. As the Foundation's executive director, she had spearheaded the community center project while balancing her responsibilities as a mother to Jason, now 17, and Lily, 14. "The mayor just arrived," she informed us, checking her watch, "and the news crew is setting up by the main entrance." "Nervous?" I asked, noting the slight tension around her eyes. She smiled ruefully. "A little. This project has been 2 years in the making. I want everything to be perfect." "It already is," I assured her, gesturing to the bustling space around us. "Look at what you've created here." Jason appeared, wearing a volunteer t-shirt and looking remarkably like his adoptive mother in his confident stance. "Mom, the tour. Groups are ready whenever you are." "Thank you, sweetheart," Stephanie replied, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from her jacket. "Please make sure Lily knows when to bring out the donor recognition plaques." As Jason hurried off, I observed the easy interaction between mother and son. The anxious executive who had once worried about her ability to parent had evolved into a mother who balanced authority with affection, structure with freedom. Jason had thrived under her care, excelling academically and developing a passion for architecture that echoed Thomas's interest in building. Lily had blossomed as well. Her artistic talents had expanded beyond simple drawings to painting and digital design. Her artwork now adorned several walls of the community center, bringing color and hope to spaces designed for children in transition. The ceremony began promptly, with Stephanie delivering a compelling speech about the Foundation's mission and impact. Bradley presented impressive statistics on families served and funds raised, while Emma spoke movingly about the therapeutic programs she had developed. Throughout it all, I watched from the front row, my heart full of pride. When it came time to cut the ribbon, Stephanie surprised me by calling me to the stage. "None of this would exist without my grandmother, Margaret Wilson," she announced to the assembled crowd. 5 years ago, she taught us the most important lesson of our lives through a changed will and an unexpected requirement. What began as an obligation has become our greatest purpose. As I joined my grandchildren on the stage, I was overwhelmed by the journey we had taken together. The selfish adults who had relegated me to the basement were unrecognizable in these compassionate, purpose-driven people before me. "Margaret, would you do the honors?" the mayor asked, handing me the ceremonial scissors. With steady hands, I cut the ribbon, officially opening the Caroline and Michael Wilson Community Center. Applause erupted as photographers captured the moment, my grandchildren surrounding me, their faces alight with genuine joy and accomplishment. Later that evening, after the guests had departed and the cleanup was complete, we gathered at my home for a more intimate celebration. The dining room table was extended to accommodate our growing family, Bradley and Meredith with little Thomas, Emma and David, newly engaged after years of partnership, Stephanie with Jason and Lily, and several Foundation colleagues who had become like family over the years. As we shared a meal together, Conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and the comfortable interruptions of people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. I watched my grandchildren interact with their partners and children, noting how the values Thomas and I had tried to instill had finally taken root and flourished. After dessert, as coffee was being served, Stephanie tapped her glass for attention. "We have something special planned," she announced, nodding to Jason, who disappeared briefly before returning with a large, gift-wrapped package. "What's this?" I asked as he placed it carefully before me. "Open it," Lily urged, her eyes bright. With excitement, inside was a beautifully bound book titled The Wilson Legacy: 5 Years of Community Impact. Its pages documented the Foundation's growth and achievements since my grandchildren had begun their required service, complete with photographs, testimonials, and personal reflections. "Turn to page 43, Bradley suggested, an unusual emotion roughening his voice. I did as instructed and found a section titled Margaret's Mandate. It contained formal documentation of a new foundation initiative, a program offering support services specifically for elderly individuals raising grandchildren after parental loss. "We've secured funding for the next decade," Emma explained. "It will provide financial assistance, respite care, counseling services, and practical support for grandparents in situations similar to yours." We realized there was a gap in services, Stephanie added. Many grandparents take on the responsibility of raising grandchildren with little support or recognition. This program honors what you did for us by helping others in similar circumstances. "The 5-year requirement in your will has officially ended today," Bradley noted, "but none of us are walking away. This work has become part of who we are." Traced the program description with trembling fingers, too moved to speak immediately. What had begun as a difficult lesson, a consequence designed to remind my grandchildren of the values they had forgotten, had evolved into something far more significant than I could have imagined. "Thank you," I finally managed, looking at each of them in turn. "This means more than I can express." "We owe you everything, Grandma," Emma said softly. "You gave us a second chance at being the people Mom and Dad raised us to be." As the evening progressed, I found a quiet moment with Richard, who had attended both the ceremony and our family dinner. Now in his 60s, he remained a trusted advisor and friend. "Thomas would be so proud," he remarked, watching my grandchildren clear the table together, refusing my offers of help. "Of all of them, but especially of you. It took courage to do what you did." "It was a gamble," I admitted. "One that could have backfired terribly." "But it didn't," he pointed out, "because you knew them better than they knew themselves. You saw what they could be when they reconnected with what truly matters." Later, that night, after everyone had gone and the house was quiet again, I sat in my garden under the stars. The rose bushes Thomas and I had planted decades ago were beginning to bloom again, their sweet scent mingling with the cool evening air. I thought about the journey we had taken, from the betrayal of being relegated to the basement to the triumph of today's ceremony. The path had not been easy or straightforward, but it had led us exactly where we needed to go. The changed will that had once seemed like my last defense against my grandchildren's selfishness had become instead a doorway to transformation. The inheritance they had once sought so eagerly, property and money, had been replaced by something far more valuable: purpose, compassion, and a legacy of service that would outlast all of us. As I prepared for bed that night, I paused by the family photographs that now filled my bedroom walls. Among them was the original photo of Thomas holding baby Caroline, the courthouse photo from Stephanie's adoption of Jason and Lily, Bradley and Meredith's wedding portrait, and countless candid moments captured over the past 5 years. Each image told a story of redemption and growth, of family bonds tested and ultimately strengthened. The circle that had nearly been broken had not only been restored but expanded, embracing new members, and reaching out to support other families in need. We did it, Thomas, I whispered to the quiet room. Our legacy is secure, not in bank accounts or property deeds, but in the hearts of our grandchildren and the lives they'll touch through the foundation. That night, I slept peacefully, grateful for second chances and the wisdom to recognize that sometimes the greatest gift we can give those we love is the opportunity to become their best selves. Even when that gift comes wrapped in the unexpected package of a changed will and a difficult lesson. The basement that had once been my prison had been transformed into a place of joy and connection. The grandchildren who had once seen me as a burden had become my greatest pride. And the will that had been meant as a consequence had become instead a catalyst for healing and growth. In the end, the true inheritance had nothing to do with money or property. It was the values, the love, and the sense of purpose that would continue long after I was gone. A legacy more valuable than anything that could be written into a legal document or measured in dollars and cents. And that, I reflected as I drifted off to sleep, was worth everything we had gone through to reach this point of understanding and grace. 10 years had passed since that pivotal moment when I had changed my will and confronted my grandchildren about their treatment of me. Now at 82, I found myself reflecting on the remarkable journey our family had taken as I prepared for a milestone celebration. Today marked the 10th anniversary of the Caroline and Michael Wilson Foundation, which had grown from a small family obligation into one of the most respected charitable organizations in the state. What had begun as a consequence in a revised will had blossomed into a legacy that touched thousands of lives each year. "Grandma, are you almost ready?" Emma called from downstairs. "The car will be here in 15 minutes. "Just finishing up," I replied, securing a pearl earring, a gift from Thomas on our 30th anniversary, and taking a final look in the mirror. Age had etched deeper lines into my face, and my once auburn hair was now completely silver. But my eyes still held the same determination they had when I stood up to my grandchildren a decade ago, refusing to be cast aside in my own home. As I descended the stairs carefully, I was greeted by Emma and her husband David in the foyer. Their 4-year-old twins, Caroline and Michael, named after their great-grandparents, were dressed in their Sunday best, fidgeting impatiently. "You look beautiful, Grandma," Emma said warmly, helping me with my wrap. At 46, she had grown into a confident, compassionate woman who balanced her roles as the Foundation's clinical director, mother, and devoted granddaughter with remarkable grace. "The others are meeting us there?" I asked as David helped me into my coat. "Yes, Bradley and Meredith are handling the last-minute details with the caterer, and Stephanie is doing a final walkthrough with the event planner," Emma explained as we made our way to the waiting car. The Foundation's 10th anniversary gala was being held at the Grand Plaza Hotel downtown, a fitting venue for an organization that had outgrown its humble beginnings to become a cornerstone of community support in our city. What had started as a simple requirement in my revised will had evolved into something none of us could have anticipated. As our car pulled up to the hotel entrance, I was struck by the elegant banners displaying the Foundation's logo, a stylized tree with spreading branches, symbolizing growth and connection. The image had been designed by Lily, now 24 and a successful graphic artist whose work was recognized throughout the region. Bradley met us in the lobby, his 10-year-old son Thomas beside him and 7-year-old daughter Eleanor holding his hand. At 38, Bradley had matured into a thoughtful, family-oriented man who had found his purpose in managing the Foundation's finances and developing programs to teach financial literacy to foster youth. "Everything's ready, Grandma," he assured me, leaning down to kiss my cheek. "We've got a record turnout tonight." "I'm not surprised," I replied, squeezing his hand. "Your quarterly reports have been impressive." He chuckled. "Still reading those carefully, I see." "Every page," I confirmed with a smile. In truth, I had gradually reduced my active involvement in the Foundation's operations over the years, confident in my grandchildren's leadership. But I still took pride in staying informed about their achievements. The ballroom was transformed for the occasion, with elegant floral arrangements and display boards showcasing the foundation's work over the past decade. Tables were set for 300 guests, donors, community partners, and families who had been touched by the foundation's programs. Stephanie approached as we entered, looking polished and self-assured. At 50, she had fully embraced her role as the foundation's executive director, leveraging her business acumen to expand its reach while raising Jason and Lily to adulthood. "The governor just arrived," she informed us, casually adjusting my corsage. "And the mayor is bringing the proclamation declaring today Wilson Foundation Day throughout the city." All this from a changed will and 5 years of required service. I marveled, taking in the scope of what they had built. Stephanie's expression softened. "That requirement was the best thing that ever happened to us, Grandma. You knew exactly what we needed, even when we didn't." As guests began to arrive, I was escorted to a special table at the front of the room, where I would be joined by my grandchildren and their families. A video presentation was playing on large screens around the ballroom, images from the foundation's history, from its early days to the present. I watched with pride as photographs chronicled our journey, the first modest office space, the initial programs for orphaned children, the community center opening 5 years ago, and the recent expansion into 3 neighboring counties. Interspersed with these milestones were personal moments: Stephanie's adoption of Jason and Lily, Bradley's wedding to Meredith, Emma receiving her doctorate in child psychology. Jason and Lily, now adults themselves, approached my table. Jason, at 27, had followed in Thomas's footsteps after all, becoming an architect whose designs focused on creating nurturing spaces for vulnerable communities. Lily had channeled her artistic talents into art therapy programs for traumatized children, bringing healing through creative expression. "Feeling nostalgic, Grandma?" Jason asked, sitting beside me and following my gaze to the screens. "A bit," I admitted. "It's remarkable how much has changed." "For the better," Lily added, her expression earnest. "Mom tells us stories sometimes about how things were before. It's hard to imagine." They knew the family history, of course, how their mother and her siblings had once relegated me to the basement, how the changed will had been the catalyst for transformation. But to them, that version of Stephanie was unrecognizable compared to the devoted mother who had given them stability and love. As the formal program began, Bradley took the stage as the evening's master of ceremonies. His easy confidence and genuine warmth set the tone as he welcomed guests and acknowledged key supporters. "Tonight, we celebrate not just 10 years of the Foundation's work, but the vision and courage of one remarkable woman," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the ballroom. "My grandmother, Margaret Wilson, who taught us the true meaning of legacy." A spotlight found me at my table, and the room erupted in applause. I acknowledged it with a nod, uncomfortable as always with public recognition, but deeply moved by the moment. Emma spoke next, sharing stories of the children and families whose lives had been changed through the Foundation's therapeutic programs. Her professional expertise was evident, but it was her compassion that shone through as she described the healing journey of trauma survivors. "When a child loses their parents, their entire world shatters," she explained. "Our programs create safe spaces where they can rebuild their sense of security and belonging. We know this works because we experienced it ourselves, through our grandmother's unwavering love and guidance after our own parents died." Stephanie followed with an overview of the Foundation's growth and impact over the decade. The statistics were impressive. Thousands of children served, hundreds of families kept intact through support services, dozens of sibling groups placed together in permanent homes. Behind each number was a story of hope and healing. 10 years ago, our grandmother presented us with a choice, Stephanie said, her gaze finding mine across the room. We could fulfill a 5-year service requirement to access our inheritance, or we could walk away. What began as an obligation quickly became a calling. None of us completed our service and left. We found our purpose here. As dinner was served, I found myself surrounded by my extended family, 3 grandchildren and their spouses, 5 great-grandchildren, and Jason and Lily, who held a special place in our family circle. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and the comfortable interruptions of people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. "Do you remember that first Thanksgiving after the adoption?" Emma asked Stephanie. "When Jason beat Bradley at chess in 4 moves?" "And Bradley claimed he let him win," Stephanie recalled with a laugh. "I did let him win," Bradley protested good-naturedly. "It was a strategic loss designed to build his confidence." "Keep telling yourself that, Uncle Brad," Jason teased, reaching over to ruffle Thomas's hair. "I'll teach you my secrets, buddy, since your dad clearly needs help." The easy banter continued throughout the meal, weaving together current moments with shared memories. I watched them all with quiet joy, marveling at how completely they had transformed from the entitled adults who had once seen me as a burden to these compassionate, purposeful people before me. After dessert was served, Richard Evans joined our table. Now in his 70s, he remained a dear friend and trusted advisor, serving on the Foundation's board of directors. "Quite a night," he remarked, taking the empty seat beside me. "Thomas would be bursting with pride." "He would," I agreed, watching. As little Caroline carefully explained something to her cousin Eleanor, her expressive hand gestures reminding me so much of my daughter. "I feel him here tonight, in all of them." "Your changed will might be the most impactful legal document I've ever drafted," Richard mused. "Not many estate plans result in this kind of transformation." "It was a gamble," I admitted. "One that could have gone very differently." "But it didn't," he pointed out, "because you knew them better than they knew themselves. You saw what they could become if they reconnected with what truly matters." The evening's program continued with a special presentation honoring the Foundation's key accomplishments. A video tribute featured testimonials from families who had received support, children who had found permanent homes, and community partners who had witnessed the organization's impact firsthand. One segment particularly touched my heart, an interview with an elderly woman who had been raising her 3 grandchildren after her daughter's death. "The Margaret's Mandate program saved us," she said, emotion evident in her voice. "The financial assistance helped keep our family together, but the support groups and counseling services, those gave me back my hope when I thought I had nothing left to give." Margaret's Mandate, the program my grandchildren had established 5 years ago to support grandparents raising grandchildren, had expanded significantly, now serving families in 5 states. What had begun as a tribute to my experience had become a lifeline for countless others facing similar challenges. As the formal program concluded, Bradley returned to the podium for a special announcement. "Tonight, we're honored to unveil our most ambitious initiative yet," he began, signaling for a curtain to be drawn back, revealing a large architectural rendering. "The Margaret Wilson Center for Family Preservation, a comprehensive resource hub that will bring all our services under one roof and allow us to triple our capacity to serve vulnerable children and families." The image showed a beautiful campus-like setting with several interconnected buildings surrounded by gardens and play areas. The design, I realized with a start, incorporated elements of the home where I had raised my grandchildren: the distinctive roofline, the wraparound porch, the rose garden. The center will include emergency housing for siblings awaiting placement, therapy spaces, education facilities, and administrative offices, Bradley continued. But its heart will be the Family Connection Wing, where children in foster care can visit with relatives in a home-like setting designed to maintain and strengthen family bonds. I felt tears welling in my eyes as he explained that construction would begin next month on land that had been donated by a local philanthropist, with completion expected within 2 years. My siblings and I are pleased to announce that we have personally pledged the seed funding for this project, Bradley concluded. Every dollar we would have inherited under the original will, the inheritance we once valued above all else, will now serve as the foundation for this center that honors our grandmother's legacy of love and family preservation. The room erupted in applause as my grandchildren joined Bradley on stage, standing together as the mature, purposeful adults they had become. In that moment, I saw echoes of Caroline and Michael in their faces, the compassion, the strength, the unwavering commitment to family that had defined their parents' lives. After the presentation, as guests began to mingle and the formal portion of the evening concluded, my grandchildren gathered around my table. "Are you pleased?" Stephanie asked, her expression seeking my approval in a way that reminded me of her childhood. "Beyond words," I assured them. "The center is magnificent." It was Jason's design, Emma explained. "He incorporated elements from the house on Maple Street, the house where you raised us and where you nearly lost us." Jason shrugged modestly. "I wanted it to feel like home. That's what the foundation is really about, isn't it? Helping children find their way home, whatever form that takes." As the evening progressed, I found myself tiring. Emma noticed immediately and arranged for the car to take me home. My grandchildren insisted on accompanying me, leaving the event planners to handle the remaining details. "But it's your night," I protested. "You should stay." "It's our night," Bradley corrected gently. "All of us together. That's what matters." Back at my house, the same house where our journey had begun a decade ago, we gathered in the living room for a quieter celebration. The formal attire was shed in favor of comfort, high heels kicked off, ties loosened. "A toast," Stephanie proposed, raising her glass. "To Grandma, who had the courage to teach us a lesson we desperately needed to learn." "To the foundation," Bradley added, "and 10 more years of growing our impact." "To family," Emma concluded, "the one we were born into and the one we continue to build." As their glasses clinked together, I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. The inheritance I had once threatened to withhold had ultimately led to something far more valuable than money or property. It had helped my grandchildren rediscover their capacity for compassion, responsibility, and love. "I have something for each of you," I said, reaching for a small box I had prepared earlier. Inside were 3 identical keys. "What are these for?" Bradley asked, examining his curiously. "The safe deposit box at First National," I explained. "Inside you'll find letters. I've written to each of you, to be read after I'm gone. There are also letters for your children, and for Jason and Lily." "Grandma," Emma began, her expression troubled. "I'm not going anywhere just yet," I assured her with a smile. "But at 82, I believe in being prepared. The letters contain things I want you to remember, stories about your parents, wisdom from your grandfather, and my reflections on the journey we've taken together." "We've come full circle, haven't we?" Stephanie observed quietly. "From inheritance to legacy." "Yes," I agreed, looking at each of them in turn. These remarkable adults who had once broken children in my care, then entitled adults who had forgotten their values, and now compassionate leaders creating ripples of positive change. From what you could get to what you could give. And that, my dears, is the greatest inheritance of all. Later that night, after they had all gone home to their own families, I sat in Thomas's old armchair by the fireplace, reflecting on the evening and the decade that had preceded it. The basement that had once been my reluctant bedroom was now a joyful space where great-grandchildren played during family gatherings. The dining room table that had witnessed such bitter confrontations had become, once again, the heart of family celebrations. "We did it, Thomas," I whispered to the quiet room. "Our legacy is secure, not in bank accounts or property deeds, but in the hearts of our grandchildren and the lives they'll touch through the foundation. As I prepared for bed that night, I paused by the family photographs that filled my bedroom walls. Among them was a new addition, tonight's formal portrait of the entire extended family, 4 generations gathered in celebration of what we had built together. The journey had not been easy or straightforward, but it had led exactly where we needed to go. The changed will that had once seemed like my last defense against my grandchildren's selfishness had become instead a doorway to transformation. The inheritance they had once sought so eagerly, property and money, had been replaced by something far more valuable: purpose, compassion, and a legacy of service that would outlast all of us. And in that knowledge, I found my greatest peace. 15. Years after changing my will and confronting my grandchildren, I celebrated my 87th birthday surrounded by 4 generations of the Wilson family. The dining room table, the same one where we had once faced off over the Hendersons' offer to buy the house, now stretched to its full length to accommodate everyone. My 3 grandchildren, now in their 50s, had grown into the people their parents would have been proud of. The path hadn't been straight or easy, but the journey had brought us here, to a place of genuine connection and shared purpose that I once feared was lost forever. "Speech!" called out Bradley's teenage daughter Eleanor, starting a chorus that was quickly taken up by the rest of the family. "At 87, I believe I've earned the right to keep my remarks brief," I said with a smile, looking around at the beloved faces that surrounded me. "But I will say this. Legacy isn't what we leave for people. It's what we leave in them. And looking at all of you, I couldn't be prouder of what we've built together." The Margaret Wilson Center for Family. Preservation had opened its doors 2 years ago and was already making a profound difference in the community. My grandchildren continued to lead the foundation with vision and compassion, balancing their professional responsibilities with deep commitment to their own families. After the birthday celebration, as most of the family dispersed to their homes, Stephanie lingered behind to help me with the cleanup, despite my insistence that it could wait until morning. "I've been thinking a lot lately," she said as we worked side by side, just as we had done countless times over the years. "About that period when we put you in the basement, how we could have been so blind, so selfish." "That was a lifetime ago," I said gently, noting the persistent guilt that still shadowed her eyes at times. "And look at all the good that came from it. Because you were brave enough to stand up to us," she pointed out. "What if you hadn't changed your will? What if you'd just accepted how we treated you?" I considered her question carefully, folding a linen napkin as I gathered my thoughts. "Life rarely offers us clean choices," I replied. "The basement was actually a blessing in disguise. It forced me to confront what was happening to our family before it was too late, and it gave me the courage to take action, not just for myself, but for all of you." She nodded, absorbing my words. "Jason's oldest starts college next fall," she said, changing the subject but not really. "Communication major. She wants to create documentaries about families separated by foster care and how they can be reunited. Says she was inspired by growing up hearing our family story." "The ripples continue," I murmured, deeply moved by this evidence of our legacy extending to the next generation. The following morning, Richard came by as he did every Sunday, bringing fresh bagels and the newspaper. At 75, he remained a dear friend and confidant, his legal practice now managed primarily by his daughter, while he served as an advisor to the foundation. "The center just received another major grant," he informed me as we enjoyed our breakfast on the porch. "The Jameson Foundation was impressed by the sibling reunification program." "Stephanie mentioned that," I said, pleased but not surprised. The foundation's work continued to expand, touching more lives every year. "It's remarkable, Margaret," Richard mused, looking out at the garden where Thomas and I had once planted roses together. "When we drafted that revision 15 years ago, neither of us could have predicted this outcome. I hoped, I admitted. But I wasn't certain. It could have gone very differently. But it didn't, he reminded me, echoing words he had spoken many times over the years. Because you knew them better than they knew themselves. You saw what they could become if they reconnected with what truly matters. That afternoon, Emma brought her twins, now teenagers, by to help with some yard work. Caroline, named after my daughter, had her grandmother's musical talent and thoughtful nature. Michael had his grandfather's steady presence and kind eyes. Watching them tend to the garden that Thomas and I had planted decades ago, I felt the continuity of generations, the invisible threads that connected us across time. We're studying inheritance patterns in biology, Caroline mentioned as she carefully pruned a rosebush under my guidance. Dominant and recessive traits, genetic expression. Fascinating, I replied. But you know, the most important inheritance isn't biological at all. Values, Michael said without looking up from the mulch he was spreading. That's what Mom always says. The real Wilson inheritance is values. Smart woman, your mother, I said with a smile. She learned that lesson the hard way. We know the story, Caroline assured me, about the basement and the will and everything. Mom says it was the wake-up call they all needed. It was a turning point, I acknowledged. Sometimes love requires difficult choices. As evening approached and the teenagers departed, I found myself alone with my thoughts and memories. Moving carefully, I made my way to the small desk in my bedroom where I kept my most treasured possessions. From the bottom drawer, I retrieved a leather-bound journal, my private record of our family's journey. Opening to a blank page, I began to write. 15 years ago, I thought I was fighting for my dignity and my home. In truth, I was fighting for my grandchildren's souls, for the compassionate, responsible adults I knew they could be despite their momentary selfishness. The changed will and 5-year service requirement weren't punishments, but invitations. To reconnect with the values Caroline and Michael had instilled in them. To remember who they were meant to be. What began as an obligation has flourished into a multi-generational commitment to service. My great-grandchildren speak of the foundation as part of their birthright, a living legacy they will someday inherit and expand. The basement that was once my prison now hosts sleepovers and family game nights. The dining room table that witnessed our bitter confrontation now gathers us for celebrations. Thomas would be proud of the adults our grandchildren have become. Caroline and Michael would be overjoyed to see their children's renewed commitment to the values they held dear. And I am profoundly grateful that what could have been the final chapter of family discord became instead the opening pages of our greatest story. Legacy isn't found in bank accounts or property deeds. It lives in the hearts and actions of those who carry our values forward, long after we're gone. By that measure, the Wilson legacy is secure for generations to come. Closing the journal, I gazed out the window at the setting sun, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The house around me, the home Thomas and I had built, where we had raised our daughter, where I had later raised our grandchildren, felt suffused with peace and purpose. The basement bedroom was long gone, transformed into a bright, welcoming space filled with laughter and love. The changed will that had once seemed like my last defense had become a bridge to understanding and growth. The inheritance my grandchildren had once valued only in monetary terms had been replaced by something far more precious, a legacy of compassion, service, and family bonds that would outlast any material possession. As night fell on another day in our continuing story, I whispered a silent thank you to Thomas, to Caroline and Michael, and to the younger Margaret who had found the courage to stand her ground when it mattered most. Some inheritances can't be measured in dollars. Some legacies are written not in legal documents, but in transformed lives and hearts that remember what truly matters. Looking for more? We've got two amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.